and maybe we can kick off. Today, Juan is leading us. So, Tanner, I think this is your first, maybe you're the only one that is your first time here. So, welcome.
Thank you.
We are in the third chapter today. We're going to read half of it. And every session, one different person leads the conversation. So today Juan is leading it, and I'll pass to him to start. And just meanwhile, Barata, hi. And I think maybe
Hey.
you muted Santi last time, or his server muted, but I can't unmute him. Oh, there you go. Thanks.
Thanks, Livi. Hey, everyone. So I just shared my notes in the channel so that everyone can see at least what I highlighted from the chapters. And well, the general idea of the book that I have had until the moment is that she is analyzing several cases and several CPR institutions for trying to find some underlying principles that they all share. And in this chapter number 3, she makes a study of cases that basically divide into conflicts because of water. And she states like the difference between several CPR institutions and how they differ from each other, but they actually end up like doing the same. And well, for me, it was really good to read, and it was a word that stays in my mind after reading the book, where she says tailoring. And first, when I started reading the book, I thought that these 8 principles were going to be these strict rules that we have to follow. And just by following them, you have like a success answer. But then after reading the book, I just like recognized that she's telling and explaining some underlying principles that can vary due to the need of each CPR. And it's very interesting to be reading this while in the TEC also, because we are tailoring our system, and so that's why we shouldn't look outside for a definitive answer. The answer should be constructed between us, should be agreed between us, and should be what suits the best for us and for our case. It's not just like, hey, let's do what they did on the Huertas, or let's do what they did on the Sanjeras, or what they did on the mountains. It's to see what are our needs, and to see how can we monitor ourselves, and see how can we like set rules that are agreed by each other. The other thing that I thought it was really interesting about the chapter is that she okay, that she was talking about some ideas about property rights, and how like in sometimes there are these theories that may stand against common property, but there are also like good sides to it. So it's like what I've liked a lot is this language of, hey, we don't have all the answers, but we can study what have been the underlying principles for successful institutions, and and how can we like try to learn from them. So yes, that's like my initial take, and I would like to hear, what do you think?
Yeah, definitely agree that contextualizing the different rules for different CPRs at a local level is super important. And that was one of the things that was highlighted. Also, noticed that it was kind of interesting how with the various kind of CPRs, there was not only the appropriation of the resources that was managed, but also contributions to the environment, right? So they didn't just take, they also, built the roads or helped maintain infrastructure or helped with the labor around some of the things. So there was not only just taking from the resources, but also contributing to making sure the system itself would work, and then kind of a governance or monitoring level around those things.
Yeah, that was one of the questions that I am like trying to like solve in the conflict resolution working group. It's like, do we need external monitors, or can we have mutual monitoring? And in the book it says like external monitors are when there's a lot of scarcity and there is no trust between the members. But as we are trying to build trust, and we are trying to manage scarcity, I think that for our monitoring solution, it would be best to have a mutual system, but with clear rules. I don't know if you want to go really deep on the details of each case that she mentions, or if you want to go to the through the cases like as examples of the point that she's trying to make of how are CPR institutions sustainable through time.
Yeah, on this point of sustainability and making sure that everything goes back to the system, also, one of the things I highlighted was that no citizen could send more cows to the Alp than he could feed during the winter. And it feels so simple, but something I thought it's quite difficult in our DAO scenarios to make sure that we have like the people that are in the system are gonna be fed by those cows, that it's proportionate and that we're not welcoming like an exaggerate number of people for a limited resource that we have. So also like thinking of the onboarding questions and how to make people feel welcome and being contributing, but also thinking that of this optimal relationship of people and resources.
Who else want to say some highlighted paragraph or something that called their attention on this chapter?
Yeah, for me, what caught my attention, can you mute one sec? Was the I have it's almost impossible to get the operational rules right at the first time. That's highlighted on the book, but I went ahead and I think we are already doing it, but things we cannot build that perfect system in the first try. It's like good to look what others do, and then we just copy and start from a better place than just from scratch.
I think one of the things that caught my attention was early on in the chapter where she speaks about fugitive resources, so resources that are hard to contain, like groundwater and such, and how resource economists have always solved that problem by introducing private property, because it just, now the problem is solved. If somebody owns it, then they all take care of it. And it seems so logical. And I love that, in this book, she actually, the point is to say that it sounds logical, but it is actually illogical. And there are ways that we can share these commons, and that the cases that she used are have such a long history. The youngest one is 100 years old, and the oldest ones are 1,000 years old. So it's not something new that's being invented now. It's something that we've lost somehow, and it's sort of like we can now take care to get it back by studying the way that it used to work and trying to apply those principles. So I think just starting just the beginning of this chapter really caught my attention, and that's one of the things that really stuck with me. And then the other thing is, when they were talking about the irrigation in Valencia, and I don't remember the names of these, what they were called, but essentially it was managing the irrigation from the canals, and that there were certain rules that were just there were certain processes that were applied, the order and the duration, for example. And then as the state would change, whether there was drought or overflow, they would change the process. So the process itself was adaptable to the conditions of the environment. So it was super agile and very flexible. And that was something else that is just sort of shaping my way of thinking. Those two ideas really stuck with me, and I continue to come back and chew on them.
There was this paragraph that left me without breath, and I pasted it in the chat, that says that by the time the centralized monarchy based on the Castilian model came to dominate Spain and Latin America, the autonomy of the Huertas was well established. The continuing willingness of the irrigators in these regions to stand up for their rights attest that they had greater autonomy than did those in other parts of Spain. One can only wonder if the course of history in Latin America might have been different substantially if the Spanish monarchy established by Ferdinand and Isabella had been modeled on Aragon and not in Castile. It touches
me. That's the best part of the book, by the way. That's what we are fighting for here in Barcelona.
And also in Latin America.
Right.
I also want to add over this kind of the sustainability that you guys mentioned. And what really struck me was the fact that there were a lot of space for improving the efficiency of these commons, but in fact, working towards improving these efficiencies might backfire because of the associated costs of basically reconfiguring the whole network and the whole again monitoring systems. So one could just come from the outside, say, hey, if you do this like this and that like that, you can increase your yield by this percentage. But then this would itself mean a lot of different factors that would need to be readjusted for the new model. And it kind of reminded me of this, again, the unquantifiable aspect of a system where, you design a system and the efficiency is one aspect, but the fact that you feel the power, sovereignty of owning it, the fact that you are managing it, together in a participated decision making, and its impact on the life surrounding the village, etc. All these like external factors stemming from one's system design you make are really important, and kind of like a very important point as well in this kind of like attention on efficiency, and then also this yeah I couldn't connect the last point, but I hope you guys got what I wanted to say.
Coming back to something that I don't remember who said. I think Tam. She said that these like studies are from things that are more than 100 years old, and I wonder many times that as there was no internet and not many things that there is today, that maybe 100 years. I don't know, maybe 20 years ago was like 5 years nowadays, or like I don't know how to take into account those time frames, but yeah, it's still like the best they had when they made the book, I guess.
Other thing that I have been reflectioning is about the importance of social agreements and how sometimes we underestimate them, because with social agreements is that all civilizations have arisen. So why can't we have social agreements in a decentralized world? And another case that is not on the book, but that I have been relating to, meanwhile I read this, is here in Colombia, in the indigenous people, Guayú, they have their own legislative system that is apart from Colombia, and the main justice role in that system is a person that is called palabrero. That is a person that is fluid with words, and whose agreements, even though that he makes agreements as spoken agreements, those agreements have the legitimacy of their own internal law. So what I think and what I reflect is that the most important thing is, and I think of this also after hearing Septimus in the last call, is to have clear rules and boundaries, because when people accept the rules and boundaries, then the social acceptance of these rules give them the legitimacy to be enforced. I am going to search a link of the Palabreros, so you can read a little bit of it, and it's very interesting because these indigenous people, they have lived in this place even before the Spanish came, and they were living, and they live here after the state of Colombia arise, and as is said in the paragraph, they have their own legitimacy, and they stand for their rights, so that their own legislative system is respected.
So one of the just response to you, Juan, about the social agreements is one of the things I had a big hard time grappling with was, in fact, the social agreements that they had. And I think one of the examples was in Japan, where they had a monitoring system where you'd have basically a citizen's arrest where they would, punish somebody who is illegally harvesting the commons land. And if you were caught doing it, they would confiscate the harvest on behalf of the village. They would take your equipment and force you to come back and purchase it from the village to get your horses or your carriage back, whatever it was. And these social agreements, it fascinates me because they set the foundation for like kind of the legal jurisprudence that occurred later on, and the basis of law that became what those commons were, and how difficult it must have been to have that type of mindset and that cultural attitude that these are the social agreements we have. Today we have these social agreements, but they're very far from the type of communal mindset or the commons mindset. And that's something that I have a hard time trying to grapple with when it comes to, especially when it comes to DAOs. How do you have this mindset where we're shifting from everything is kind of privatized, but we want to kind of isolate and separate this commons area or this public sector and say, hey, we need to treat this differently from a social point of view and have our social agreements and do things of that nature. So I just wondered if anybody had any thoughts on that.
I have many thoughts on that. So essentially, I think it comes down to a local versus global level. If you're operating at a local level, you can have human-centric agreements that are based on, social norms and social agreements, right? Because it's local, it's humans engaging. On a global level, especially with blockchains, A, it's just a free-for-all, but B, you also have humans and machines interacting. And so social agreements don't work when you have machines on the network that don't understand what humans are, right? So in order to have social agreements in a digital space, or especially with DAOs, you have to have some sort of local context under which you operate, which requires some sort of permissioned gateway, oftentimes like token permission chats, or systems that only allow like DAO members or token holders to operate within that context. Then once you have that permissioned barrier, you can create a localized context, and in that local context, a community can have its own social norms, social agreements, etc. But it has to first create that bubble or that permissioned layer before you can kind of get into that level.
Yeah, also
Sorry, I just wanted to ask, are you insisting that the design of the system will influence the cultural and social behaviors rather than vice versa?
Yeah, if you have a system that's permissionless that anyone can operate in, then essentially you fall to the lowest common denominator of trust, which is 0, because any address, anyone can operate on it. So there's no trust. Like on the internet, everything is just a click away, right? So every single computer is networked. And unless you have a firewall, they are all right next to each other. So it's imagine like an infinite dimensional space where you are like literally shoulder to shoulder with everyone in the world. That's the internet. Firewalls create a separation between that. So then it's like, okay, well then there's us in this little bubble, and then we can interact. So human thinking, often we think of social context. We all get in a room, we hang out, etc. On the internet, in a digital space, everything is like very, very close unless you create those barriers, create those rooms, create that separation. So if you want to have something that operates in a way that's more human-centric, you have to create a space for that, because in a digital space, the internet and blockchain stuff were created for machines. They were created for servers and addresses that are all just right next to each other. So it's like anything you share on the internet is like sharing with literally everyone in the world, which falls to the lowest common denominator of whoever wants to do whatever with that information or data or resource or etc. Does that make sense?
Yes, I agree. I feel that blockchain is based on the idea that we can make exchanges with all the world without having to trust people. But when we take away trust from the equation, it just leaves like an empty system. So I think that what we are trying to make is to build trust over a trustless system. And I totally agree with what you were saying, that for that we need to have rules and boundaries to divide us and to make us stand over the rest.
Yeah, on that I can also share a little bit of what we've been, how we've been dealing with that in the TEC. That is how to, we are in a process now of understanding our boundaries and rules. And a big part of building this trust and having the rules defined, the ones that are coming from the machines and the ones that are coming from the people, and having them correlating in a harmonious way where people have awareness of all the decisions that are going to be taken by the machines. Like now, for example, we open the hatch parameters, like all the parameters that of the DAO for the community to give inputs on, because it's very important for everyone to know like what is that is making the machine operate, what are going to be these rules and boundaries. And also there is a huge culture of trust that I think it does create a natural boundary of I think if everyone has a good relationship with each other and these relationships are being strengthened with time, and people, when they enter, they sense the culture that already exists, this feeling of the culture is already a boundary on itself. That if you're not resonant with the culture that it's being built, it's going to be a little bit harder for you to integrate. But that bubble is welcoming. So it's open, but it's dense in a sense. So I think that is like a soft boundary somehow.
Yeah, I think that's a really good point, that you can have boundaries that are both soft, like on the human and cultural level, as well as hard on the contract level, like do you have a token, can you participate, etc. I think, yeah, it's really cool you guys are doing the combination of both, because both are really important.
So just to clarify, you're trying to embed that type of cultural expectations and those social agreements within the first amount of hatchers within the bonding curve, saying, you know, these people who are initially starting this have a vested interest, and from this small group we're going to create a culture that we want, that is designed for this system, and then hopefully it perpetuates with every new member joining. Is that right?
But yeah, that's about right. Do you want to add anything on that, Griff?
Sure. Yeah, culture, once it's started, it starts from there, you know? If you start a culture of speculative investors, you know, then you're going to have, that's going to be the starting point, and it's going to be hard to go toward, take that group and say, hey, let's go on Gitcoin and fund a bunch of grants, right? And it's just going to be like a challenge there. But you start with a bunch, if you start with some cultural rules that are like tuned for the direction you want to go, then it will diverge, but not as much, you know, as it's not like it's just starting from some random starting point. So it's important to set those cultural rules to align them with the expectations of what you're trying to achieve. I don't know if that makes sense. But the hatchers will have all the governance power in the TEC. So they're the ones making the decisions. After that, it's hard for speculators to come in and get a lot of governance power. They can, but it costs a lot more than it does early on in the bonding. So as long as we hit those guys, we'll be good. Sorry, I keep going.
No, so is there like a sense of like you want to create some form of exclusion early on just to ensure that you set good practices? And
Absolutely. That's actually what the goal is, to have a multi-game scenario so that we can start lots of commons with this trusted seed. So that we have this trusted seed with the common stack, where anyone with a C stack token is actually not only part of this curated list of people who have like donated in some way, have been altruistic in some way, and it's by either donating their time or their funds, or also they've been we literally go and look at everyone who applies and make sure they don't have a green frog on their Twitter handle. It's like it's just like we check everybody out. And then on top of that, they're also become part of a legal association, so that they're also protected to start these, to initial a Swiss association that protects them. That the terms are written just to protect them for launching these bonding curves, which, it could be a security or whatever. So we don't want to, make people be at risk. And then once we curated a good group for the TEC, now the trusted seed is loaded with a bunch of token engineers, right? So now when someone wants to start a commons for roads in Ecuador or something one day, they can go to the trusted seed, which was started with all these token engineers, and they can bring the blockchain, like token engineering knowledge, and be that kind of gateway. And also this cultural understanding of having launched a few of these before and what succeeded, what failed. And then if the roads coin people, they don't have that expertise, well, now they have this like group of advisors. And the common stack here actually curates this list, this graduated sanctions. If someone goes into the token engineering commons and they start like using bots to play with the market, pump and dump the bonding curve or something, we'll take away their C-stack tokens, because we don't want them doing that in the next one and in the next one. But Juan Carlos is really handling the graduated sanctions things. It's like there's also going to be levels where most of the sanctions don't involve taking away someone's stack tokens. That's pretty like ultimate like sanction. It'd be probably a warning. Hey, dude, turn off the bots, or we will take away your token.
Yeah, it's very interesting that we are studying the first half of the chapter 3, and after this first half of chapter 3, then she mentions the 8 principles. That it's like a very clear and very I think general like system where she like points what she calls the principles of the design principle. And I think it's been a really good practice for the TEC to try to focus and to have a development on each one of these points, because I think we are trying to create a common pool resource that differs from the ones that appear in this book, but that we have to tailor according to what she's presenting.
I have a question to everyone who'd read the book. There is a part that says, the land had in communal tenure meets the previously cited 5 conditions that netting posits as conducive to communal property rather than private property. Does anybody knows what is this previously cited 5 conditions? I couldn't find it when looking for it.
Can you read the passage again?
Yeah, it says, here I'll share. The land held in communal tenure meets the previously cited 5 conditions that netting point posits as conducive to communal property rather than private property.
Livia, I think it is about the costs. Yeah, here. So it's in No. So it was about basically why when it is beneficial for land to be common rather than private. And I think it was a few pages before. Yes, so it is 63, page 63. 1, the value of production per unit of land is low. 2, the frequency or dependability of use or yield is low. 3, the possibility of improvement or intensification is low. 4, a large territory is needed for effective use. And 5, relatively large groups are required for capital investment activities.
Wow, that was it. Thank you.
I want to go back to something Tamara said about adaptability. I think it's really important, and I think it's something that she stresses in each of the cases. Before, in page 67, before the title Huerta Irrigation Institutions, she says that long-term success of these locally designed rules indicate that it is not necessary for regulators of the commons to be imposed coercively by the outside, from the outside. So I think it's very important to have decision taking from the inside, and to have like this internal legitimacy of that the collective decisions are social agreements. So I think that we don't need that much participation from the outside, rather than trying to unify and to increase the density and the legitimacy and the trust between the members of the CPRS. Do you have any question or comment or highlight paragraph that you would like to share?
If there's no one else, I want to share a second one. Yeah, so it's in 86 where she's describing this, I think it's Philippines. Yeah, Philippines, where there is this agreement between village workers to provide certain days of and no wage labor for infrastructure projects. And every village member does this, which basically means there is a zero labor cost capital for like labor power for building infrastructure. And actually, before I got into crypto and like learned about commons, my biggest interest was this economic development and the economic development policies that developing nations were pursuing after their independence. One of the research that I was really interested in was comparing the development policies of India and China. And as you know, like China has been communist country since Mao, and India has been mostly a market economy. And they were both really poor in the beginnings, right? And in that, when you come to 1970s, the whole globalization starts, and China drives all this like investment inflow. And the question is, why doesn't it go to other countries, but it goes to China? And one of the answers is, despite how horrific it was in Mao's times, one thing they did was establish a lot of communes that even like I think 30% of it still lasts to this day, where in every commune the members would have like the food, the necessary kind of like needs for them to survive, sustain themselves, and then they would work the land, like the commune land. The village would be a commune, and they would work the land according to state directories. But then each people in the village would need to provide, I think, 10 days in a year of unpaid labor. And China basically mobilized all these peasants all across the country to build huge infrastructures, which by the time globalization came, allowed foreign companies to basically build factories all around China because they had all the necessary infrastructure. There were dams, there were the irrigation systems, roads, etc. But for India, this was really hard because to be able to do these things in India, you would have to pay the people. But then the state was poor, so they didn't really have this budget. And when you had to pay, there was a lot of corruption line going down, and most of the project didn't go through. So in the China example, you see this kind of like mobilizing the surplus labor power, but then the state, like an authoritative state, comes and there is like a horrific side to it. But then you go to commons, where the people mobilize the surplus labor power by themselves, which then removes this kind of extreme violence side from the picture, but you still retain this positive and actually really interesting strategy for developing your infrastructure, which then benefits you economically in the future. And reading this was really interesting because I've seen this case like for the first time as where the state is not involved. Yeah.
I think that's so fascinating. I really like that you shared that with us. I think that's an example of like long-term rewards that maybe the people of China who are dedicating that labor weren't aware of, or maybe they would also have had some shorter-term rewards as well. In the book, there's a part where she talks about a village in Japan, and similar concept that there would be the participants would share the labor in a specific way. And the way that they would share the labor was very prescribed. One adult from each family, and how they would be placed on the field and the direction that they would cut the I don't remember what it was, but the grass. And then I really thought the sort of the ending of this. It's a quote by McKean, where they talk about all of the grass would then be bundled into different sections, and each of the kumi, I guess was the household, the group, would then be assigned one of the batches by lottery. And I thought, oh, it's a lot like when you have children and you have to cut a cake, and one child cuts the cake and the other one picks first to ensure that there's like fairness in terms of the effort and the distribution. So I thought it was sort of very neat that that was the solution for solving, ensuring that everyone did equal work and were given an equal share of the efforts.
In common management, and especially in this book, it comes repetitively over and over again as randomness is sort of justice, like randomness based on like equal exposure to that randomness and the risk or like the expectation that comes as a result of that random choice is embraced by people all over the world as the best mechanism to basically like allocate tasks. And I think it's also interesting.
Another quick point I thought it was interesting was when she's talking about the water. I don't remember the name of it, but it was a system where every person could take as much water as they wanted, and then it would be like one after the other, and the last ones would have to deal with whatever is last. But then there would be kind of a rotative system to who picks first or something. And I thought it was interesting, this idea of each farmer can decide how much water to take as long as it's not wasted. And I think this builds a lot into the regenerative idea we've been like working with of what is to not waste. And in a DAO scenario, like how can we start valuing work in the sense of enough and what is not waste, and how like what we are proposing is also having thoughts being put into the system, the regeneration of the system as a whole.
Yeah, what I liked about that was that story that you told in that about that village was that the farmers, when their turn was up, they could use as much water as they felt they needed. And so they would have the freedom to use as much water as they want. But that came with this conscious decision that the person in front of you is going to do the same, and the person behind you is going to have to suffer from whatever your decision is. And so it forces that type of take what you need, not what, you're not competing for this. Like, let's, moderate your participation in the system. And so I thought that was really interesting. And the design of these types of systems, I think there was another one with the village, the way they differentiate the actual appropriators, in which they would allocate certain resources, not based on the individuals, but rather the villages themselves. And so they group these small villages together and say, hey, you can only have this much and this much and this much. And if one individual got over their limit, guess what? The entire village is now, punished for it. And so you kind of have this like social check on each other when it comes to appropriating.
What called my attention also was the difference between each of the examples. Each of the examples is very different and addresses the problem in a different way, but it more or less like solves the problem. So for me, it's like really clear that there is no like perfect system. We can see that in each of the cases she mentions, there are problems. Ones say that the monitors are bribed, and the other one says that the decisions come from a tribunal. So it's like different ways to address the same. So it leaves us the question on how are we going to try to manage the same, and what are the procedures that we are going to promote. So yeah, for me it's really interesting to be reading this book, and I find the examples very interesting. But what I highlight from them, it's like the difference between each one of them. They are, even though the two first are for access of land and mountain, and the rest are for access of water, they just like address the same thing with different procedures. And yeah, I think that's like the message that I get from reading the book, that there's no like a definitive system. It's just like we have to be resilient have the capacity to adapt, have the capacity to respond to our needs, that when there is a lot of water, everyone can get water, but when there is drought, that we can like take measurements that don't affect everyone. So yeah, I think it's like a very dynamic system, and I highlight that.
We have 7 minutes left, and there's still some admin things to do. I just want to open the space if anyone has like a burning last comment.
Yeah, one quick thing to add, it was in one of Spanish villages, there was this kind of scarce water amounts, and then kind of like a market where people could buy and trade like water spending rights. It kind of reminded me of the carbon cap, and then the fact that like companies are able to trade this use of carbon rights with each other. And seeing this at the local level was kind of interesting. And that's it.
Livia, who is going to moderate next session?
Yeah, that's the question.
For me, it was a pleasure to moderate this one. I hope you have liked it. I've really liked this experience and sharing my notes and my understanding of the with you. And to
Thanks, Juan. Yeah, so does anybody wants to Fred wants to do it next session? Or that was just
I
a
enjoyed
signal.
very
That was
much
just...
the presentation. Thank you very much.
Thanks for coming. Welcome. And yeah, if anyone wants to pick the second half of the third chapter, this is your time. If it's too much pressure right now, you can also write in the chat if you feel like it.
I'll take it.
Yes. Yes. Thanks, Nate. Okay, so now we got to the good times. I'm happy Niran is here. Welcome, Niran.
Good to be here. It was pretty great.
We're getting to the time to raffle that sweet pen that you provided to us.
Yes.
So I'm going to give numbers to each one of you. Please remember your number, and then I'll shuffle here. So Ata number 1, Griff number 2, Juan number 3, Nate number 4, Neuron 5, Senti 6, Tam 7, Tonga 8, Fred 9, Mateo 10, Zep 11, Parada 12.
And Livia 13?
Okay, sure. Livia 13.
Okay, cool.
Number 10. Who's number 10 again?
Yay, it was me.
Mateo, yay! Cool. Send me your address and I'll send you the pen.
Awesome. Thank you. Thank you, Niran.
No problem. It's all yours to govern in Panvala's activity fund. So if you're interested, it's all in the Panvala handbook.
Thank you, Panvala.
Thank you, all benevolent Panvala. Thanks, everyone. Bye, guys. See you next week.
thanks. See you.
Great. Thank you, guys.
Bye, guys.
Thanks, Livia.